come out of here. I appreciate that Callie's got her camera on. Nobody else says, hi, Callie. You and I will just have a class here together. We'll just have a perfect. Good morning, everybody. All right, so this morning, the whole idea of this pop-in meeting is very, very simple. It's just to give you guys a forum to ask questions if you have questions about the new forms. We're going to continue to try to do little kind of vignette kind of opportunities to learn and talk about the forms. And so this just being one of those opportunities. I mentioned in the email when I sent out the invite that I am not bringing questions to the table. That's not the intent. This isn't a class. It really is just to hear from you and what you're thinking, what you're feeling. It might not even be a question. It might just be a concern, or it might just be a feeling or a thought that we can kind of process through together as a group. So with that, I will open it up to questions. If we have some straight hardline questions. I know some of you here just to listen to questions, but hopefully you've got some of your own.
Hey Tay, it's John Wind.
Hey John.
Good morning. I just had a quick clarifying thing, reading through the form really quickly on the financing addendum, paragraph 2A. I just wanted to kind of confirm, it doesn't seem like if we are representing seller, if we're the listing broker and we give, notice for the buyer to terminate or to waive their financing contingency at the end of their time period, that there's no real downside for the seller. The buyer can't unilaterally pull out of the transaction based on that, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. So just to make clear for those, if you're not looking at the form right now, the 22A, the financing addendum, section 2 is it deals with the financing contingency itself, right? So you have option A and option B. Option A says, hey, you can, buyer, you can have a financing contingency for X number of days, and the default is 21 days with the new form here. And option B says, hey, the buyer is saying, hey, we're going to go ahead and waive the financing contingency on a specific day. Also, the default for that is 21 days. But I think for folks that are using option B, I think what we will start to see more often is that they may shorten that up if they plan to waive their financing contingency on a certain date. So John is asking about option A. And excuse me, and in option A, the seller has the option, if it's left at 21 days, the financing contingency is now saying, hey, buyer, just a heads up, on day 21, if you have not waived your financing already, the seller can give a notice to perform. They've changed the name, right, to notice to perform, or notice to perform. And the buyer has 3 days from that notice. Whenever that happens from day 21 after, they have 3 days to waive their financing contingency or not waive their financing contingency and give the seller the opportunity to terminate the contract anytime from there until the day of closing, which is pretty scary. I have been kind of referring to it as playing chicken with the seller, right? As a buyer, do you just not waive your financing and say, hey, seller, I think you're going to stay in this because do you really want to pull it off and sell it to somebody else and try again and go through the timing and everything else? And the seller may say, yeah, I actually really do because I've got a great backup offer, or I really decided I didn't want to sell it, or who knows what. I think that the market has gone up 10% in the last 30 days. And so I want to pull it and relist it and try my luck again and see if I can get more. Yes, John, you're right. There is no, I know that's a long answer, but just to give it all some, some parameters there. The answer to your question is, yeah, there is no negative ramification for the seller to give that notice on day 21 or whatever is stipulated in the contract. There's no way for the buyer to then go, oh, well, you're giving me this notice, I'm out. It's not how it works. Oh, I just noticed my camera's off. Sorry, guys. I'm not sure why my camera was off, but there we go. Yeah, so does that answer your question, John?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. The only thing that I can say that may be a negative here is, we've got to assume that the agents on the other sides of these things are not going to do a good job of presetting expectations with their clients and explaining these things and everything else. And so if you're the listing agent and you are sending this notice that is, quite frankly, it's pretty divisive. It's kind of a big stick that you're swinging at the buyer, especially if the buyer doesn't know that that stick exists, right? And now all of a sudden they're getting told, hey, we got to waive our financing, or you could kill the deal at any time, even if you really never had any intention of killing the deal. On one hand, yeah, I can't imagine why, as a listing agent, you wouldn't be doing that for your seller's advantage benefit. But I think that it's going to be really, really important that when we do that, that we are being communicative and not necessarily being demonstrative with that ability, with that new ability, right? And maybe talking with the agent saying, hey, it's not that we're trying to, whatever, maybe not say that we're not trying to do this, but just say, hey, this is now a part of our process, right? This is a part of the process that our company is now utilizing when the seller or when the buyer chooses option A, and we get to whatever day is stipulated in option A, we just automatically give this notice. It's nothing personal. It's nothing specific to this transaction, but it is in the seller's best interest. So we do give this notice to perform, right? But trying to keep that from escalating. Good question. What else? Other questions?
Good morning, Tay. It's Daryl.
Daryl, how are you doing, buddy?
Good. Good morning to everybody else. So based on what you just said about giving notice, I guess if we're going to nip things at the pass before it happens, do you think it's wise that we have this conversation when we submit, or when the buyer submits an offer for our listing, to go ahead and say, hey, just a heads up, and we will, give notice in 21 days as a courtesy and following guidelines. And so don't want to create any animosity or anything, but we're just going to follow due process.
Yes, Daryl, 100%. Now, maybe you wouldn't do that before you have mutual acceptance, right? Because the contract affords you that opportunity now, right? So it's not like you're hiding it from the buyer. The buyer, if they are represented well by an agent, should be made aware of this, and that's not your job to make them aware of it while you're going through the process of getting under mutual acceptance, right? However, once you have a mutually accepted contract, I do think it would be a good idea to maybe put that in an email to the buyer's agent, just to let them know, and hey, just want to preset this expectation. Then you can even
correct, and I'm
call it right out.
A mutual acceptance.
Yeah, I think you're right, Daryl. Yeah, absolutely. I think I mentioned that on Monday in that class that we did about that. I think that that's the right time to do it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. I think you're right on. More questions about the forms? I know you've got them. You might not know specifically what they are. Again, your questions can come in the form of, hey, what do we think about this? Or, hey, can you tell me more about that?
I have a question.
Okay.
It's about the 22 AD.
I'm not talking about that.
Okay, we won't talk about that.
I'm
Then
joking.
talk to you
Yes.
later.
Yes. Hit me with the 22 AD. What do we got?
So because the provision basically takes precedence over the financing, that when you utilize it, you are in essence then waiving the financing, right? So if I put a 22, this is the way I'm understanding it. So if I put a 22 AD in there for like $30,000 and we underappraise $20,000, now the 22 AD comes into effect, theoretically, I've waived financing. Because it says it waives the provision in the financing addendum. It supersedes appraisal less than sales price provision.
Okay.
She mentioned kind of that dichotomy happening.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, because I do think that that's one of the more confusing things about the new forms. And thank you very much for setting me up for that, because I have got a couple things that I will show you all in Annie Fitzsimmons's video that pertains to this question. And what Nolani's talking about, of course, the 22 AD is the additional down payment, right? The additional funds to a low appraisal, where you are saying, hey, if the list price is 100,000 and we're going to offer 150,000, and we'll bring 30,000 of that extra 50,000 that we're offering to the table if the appraisal comes in low, right? So, but what has happened and what Annie has identified, and we talked about on Monday, and we're going to talk about right now, is that in a certain circumstance, there's an unintended result that comes from using the 22AD in correlation with the 22A when the 22A, I'm getting a lot of feedback. Hold on a second. I'm going to mute everybody. When the financing contingency is waived in the 22A. Okay, so actually, Nolani, I think what you're referencing actually it's not a blanket thing. It doesn't happen immediately. It's not like your 22AD is just immediately waived or null and void or not useful. It only becomes not useful when the financing contingency has been waived, and the 22A has specific dates where that might happen. So you can find yourself in a situation where, let's go back to that 22A for a second, the financing addendum. And let's say that you used option B. You are really going to be aggressive with an offer, and you decide to fill in that your financing contingency is going to waive on day 10. Okay. No more financing contingency on day 10. But in the 22A, you check the box that said that the appraisal would supersede or what would exist after would survive the waiver of the financing contingency. So you're saying, hey, we're going to waive financing, but we're still going to keep our provision for a low appraisal. Okay. Well, then, if you had your appraisal finished before 10 days, before you waived your appraisal, before you waived your financing, you'd be fine. But more likely, in most situations, that wouldn't happen. Right? And so your appraisal would happen after you have already waived the financing contingency. Okay, cool. This happens. This is not an issue. This is not something that's abnormal. It's fine because, again, you checked on the 22A that you are waiving or that you're continuing to maintain the appraisal contingency. However, this is where the issue is that you're talking about, is that once that financing contingency is waived, but you believe you still have the low appraisal addendum, right, or the low appraisal portion of that. If you have a 22AD included in your offer, that 22AD actually wipes out your appraisal contingency portion. It actually nullifies it because in that 22AD, it says basically that it supersedes the 22A, and it says that you have that unless you've waived your financing contingency. It says if your financing contingency is waived, then the 22AD is no longer valid. So that means in the example that I gave, the $100,000 purchase price, $150,000 is your offer, and you've brought $30,000 to a low appraisal. If that appraisal comes in at $100,000, your buyer thought that they were protected because they maintained the low appraisal portion, right? And it came in 50,000 under, not 30,000 under. So in most situations before, you would have then the ability as the buyer to walk away or renegotiate. But now with this little situation between the two forms, now if you found yourself in that position, if you had already waived financing, it would be over and done. I would like to, it's a long, complicated explanation. And even just in talking it through, you can get yourself lost in it. So I assume that, it's potential that some of you folks that are listening right now may also be struggling with, okay, I'm not totally sure I'm following. We showed one of Annie's examples. She gave two examples in her forms class, which I highly recommend. It's on YouTube for free. It's 2 hours and 46 minutes and worth every minute of it in my estimation. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show the second example that she gives because it's kind of the shorter one. We'll show that for you right now on the screen and let you listen and learn there and just kind of re-get it from her. And then if we still have questions or we feel like it would be advantageous to show the second example, which is really her first one, it's a little bit longer, we'll do that as well. So hang tight here. I will share my screen with you. And let's go to this. All right, here we go.
Okay, and one more question. Could you give a brief example with this conundrum between the forms 22A and 22AD? The explanation was a wee fast for me, thanks.
So I'm just going to explain it again, and I understand that it is confusing. So let's say that we have a buyer, a Form 22A financing contingency buyer. And just to be simple, let's say that they're an option B buyer and that their financing contingency automatically waives on the 21st day. And they have a 22AD in the transaction because it was a competitive scenario and the price was bid up over the list price by $40,000. And so the buyer said, look, I don't have 40,000, but I have 20,000. And so seller, I'll bring 20,000 over the list price, over the appraised value to try and get to the purchase price if my appraisal comes in low. So buyer has Form 22A, let's just say they mark option B, and they have a 22AD, and on line 8, they write $20,000. And on Form 22A, paragraph 2B, Roman numeral 2, buyer preserves their low appraisal provision so that when their financing contingency waives, they know they're still protected if that appraisal comes in low. What I'm telling you right now is because they have the 22AD in the transaction, they're really not protected when that appraisal comes in low. That's the effect of having the 22AD. How come? How do we get there? Because in our scenario, buyer is agreeing to bring 20,000 extra to the closing table if necessary. So let's say that our purchase price was $250, buyer's appraisal comes in at $210. Buyer's only obligated to bring 20,000, so that will get them to $230. We're still 20,000 short of the $250 purchase price. The language in 22AD, line 17, says that if buyer waives the financing contingency in the financing addendum, which this buyer will have done because their financing contingency expired on day or waived on day 21, and let's say it's day 25 before they get their appraisal, and the appraisal is low, the Form 22AD will not give the buyer the ability to terminate the transaction because 210,000 plus 20,000 is still less than 250,000. Instead, Form 22AD says, buyer, because your financing contingency waived, you're automatically required to bring whatever is necessary to close this transaction to the closing table. Okay.
Okay. All right, I think I'm back. So again, I think one of the key things, and Ramon, I see your hand, I'll get you in just a second. I think one of the key things, the takeaways here is, remember, this issue, this oops between the forms and how they talk to each other or work with each other only comes into effect if your financing is already waived. Your financing has to be waived first before it becomes an issue. And of course, you have to have a 22AD as part of your contract, right? So there is a lot in there. Also, remember that our marketplace will not be like it is today forever and ever. There will be a time when the boilerplate 21 days for the financing contingency will become irrelevant because if there is only one offer on my house or only a couple offers on my house, then I'm going to be, as a seller, I'm going to be like, okay, fine, I'll give them the 30 days like they've had for decades before to have their financing contingency. I don't care. It's a qualified buyer. They're making me a good offer. I want to sell my house. Boom, we're good to go. I think that this 22A issue with the 21 days now being the default, or the potential for issues here, is not a forever obstacle. but it is something that you're really going to have to pay attention to today. Ramon, your question, please. What's up?
Okay, Tay, work with me here. Okay, so I included 22A. I checked the box that I will not waive, or if I waive financing, I keep my appraisal addendum.
Yep.
I don't include a 22AD. I include a Form 34 saying my buyer will pay $30,000 towards a low appraisal.
Ooh. See, this is the kind of thing that happens when we have new forms and they try to restrict us. We look for new ways and opportunities to do what it is that we're really trying to intend to do. And on one hand, Ramon, I love it. All right. I love it because this is the kind of creative thing that I just like it. Just inherently, I like it. Now, that being said, we know that anytime that we use a 34, right, that we are putting ourselves in a position of writing law and we are held to the standard of a practicing lawyer. And do I want to write that on a 34? I really don't. Do I want you to write it on a 34? I really don't. Could you do something like that? Yeah, I mean, you could. There's really nothing stopping you legally from doing it. Could make a little bit of sense. I guess the answer to that is I'd rather you not. You probably can, but if you go to do that, before you do it, talk to me. Let me process that a little bit. It's a good question. It's a creative question. And I think that's actually a really good example of just all of the things that we're not thinking of right now that are going to come up and happen as we go through these forms and as we process through transactions, where there is going to be some interesting things that kind of come out of this, where we're going to go, oh, whoa, that's kind of a creative way, or oh, wow, that's really a way to trap somebody in a bad situation, or things of that nature. John, what's your question?
Yeah, I was just kind of piggybacking on what Ramon was saying. I was thinking the same thing. If I had a buyer who wanted to do that with the 22A and the 22 AD, if you could just like grab a 22 AD and copy and paste like paragraph A, B, and C on the first section of the 22 AD into a 34, then it's like that's literally the verbiage that talks about what happens if there's a low appraisal and what the buyer and seller can do. But I'm not writing it. I just grabbed it from a form, but we don't have that one sentence about the one form superseding the other. Okay.
Before I comment on that, we've got more hands up. Let's see what other people are saying. Daryl, what do you got?
Well, like I was talking to Russ about this the other night, and the 22 AD almost sounds like it's setting us up for failure, is what it sounds like to me. And so in Annie's example of day 25, I'm still not wrapping my head around what she was saying about bringing everything to the table to close the transaction, but it sounds like that the buyer would be in jeopardy. I mean, correct me on that. And it sounds like we should be trying to cancel the transaction before that happens. But anyway, correct me on that because I can't get my head around that one. Thanks.
Yeah, are you, Daryl? Stay on with me here. Keep talking with me. Are you referring to the 22 AD in terms of? I don't know why you take the 22 AD out. Definitely, it becomes null and void if you have already waived your financing.
Right.
But if you have not waived your financing, I don't think it's a bad addendum at all. I think that it's something that's pretty advantageous for buyers right now in order to achieve houses, because a lot of the competing offers are doing this, right?
Right.
So really, ultimately, if your buyer is looking at it as just, I'm bringing more money as a down payment, I actually think that this is one of the things that is that the MLS has brought in, or maybe not the MLS has brought in, but that buyers and buyers agents are doing to achieve a better offer for the seller to get a deal done, that actually is not harming the buyer as much as some of the other things that people are doing. So I'm pretty bullish on the 22 AD. You just got to pay attention to the structure of the 22A, which brings us back to Ramon's question and to John's question, which I still, I'm going to hold on to for a second. Am I missing something in your question? Is there something I'm not identifying?
I don't think so. Again, it's just me trying to wrap my head around it still,
Right.
and figure out those numbers and make sure that, I guess, like what Annie was saying, you know, let's say they brought in that extra $30,000, and she had mentioned the numbers that 250 and 230,000, and so on day 25, if the appraisal came in after the 21 days, is that basically just saying that, hey, buyer, perform, you're going to be spending your whole 230,000 to buy this place? Is that all it's really saying?
Yeah, well, it's saying that you're going to bring the entire, if your financing has waived and you've used the 22AD and the appraisal came down in low, you're going to pay whatever the difference is to purchase that price, or you'll be in default of the contract and you will lose your earnest money. Yeah, that's exactly what it's saying. What this should tell us, though, is that we really, again, you know, a lot of the issues that come from these new forms can be mitigated significantly with lots of communication.
Right.
And in this case, this would be a lot of communication with the lender. Have we ordered the appraisal? Why haven't we ordered the appraisal? When can we order the appraisal? How long is it taking you to get appraisals back? When is the appraisal coming back? Have you heard from the, I mean, it might be bugging a lender right now, but it's going to be so vitally important to do that, you know, to get it done in time that, yeah, I think, you know, this is a good opportunity or good example of needing to have that communication. Nolani, you had a question there.
It's just a follow-up to what Ramon brought up and John touched on. Instead of creating a 34, can't we just line draw through that portion of 17, 18, and 19?
Can't we just line draw through it? See,
I mean, we go to the 21W and we change that 10 to a different number. But if we just cross those lines out and have our client's initial.
What are the lines, Nolani? You said
on the middle of 17 from if buyer waives the financing contingency. So 17, 18, and 19.
Why not just cross that out? See, I knew there was a reason that I didn't want to spend time answering John's question, because somebody else would have a better answer than I had. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I like that the most. I think that it does what Ramon wants to do, although, Ramon, I see your hand up. Give me a second. I think it does what Ramon's trying to do. I think it definitely does what John's trying to do. And we're still utilizing MLS forms in a way that they were relatively intended to be used. So you've got all the right verbiage in there. You're just saying, hey, we're not going to waive this. I think that's right. I think you can definitely do it that way. So I do, again, some of this is going to be a little bit of trial and error, right? Now, if you cross that out on a 22AD that you're including, you know, we'll just remember that that section that you'll be crossing out is a benefit to the seller, right? There's no two ways to look at it. That section benefits the seller greatly because it says, hey, if you don't get your act together and get your appraisal done in, you know, within the 21 days, let's say, then, you know, one way or another, you're coming to the table with all the money. So just know or acknowledge or remember that if you cross that out, that you are making the offer less advantageous potentially than some of your competing offers. But that doesn't matter if that's what your buyer wants to do. You're going to do, you know, you need to be doing what your buyer wants you to do. And I do think, I don't know if you all have been watching the 7-part series that Annie has put out about dangerous practices that are happening right now. And if you do watch those, and I highly recommend them, there are so many things that we are doing. We're all doing them with our buyers and with our sellers that are incredibly dangerous and hold a lot or bring with them a lot of liability. So anyway, I think that it's a good reminder that we really, even in a competitive market, we should be making sure that our offers really do protect everyone properly. That's our job as real estate brokers, being held to the standard of a practicing lawyer. Daryl, what do you got?
Oh, well, I'm glad you just said that last part, the practicing lawyer part. I thought in the past from forms classes that I've taken that they say it's a no-no, especially these days, to cross out anything on our boilerplates. Am I having a brain fart on that?
I don't know that you're. I don't know that you're having. You may have that may have been what you have heard. I don't think that is the wrong way to approach it. I don't. I would agree that in general, you probably don't want to mess with the boilerplate language in a contract at all, right? The MLS and people that are pretty darn bright have put this together, although they kind of screwed this one up, right? But they put this together in a way that that lawyers decided this is structurally sound. And so if you take parts out, then you're popping out a little brick in what they're, in what they have put together. However, I don't see a reason to not pull out a section that was really, by Annie's admittal, and she was on the panel that did this, was unintended. And by looking at what Nolani's identified there in line 17 and the next two lines, it's very, the portion that they kind of made the oops on is all contained right within those two sentences. So I do think that you would be, not in a bad position necessarily to do that.
Okay, as long as you're cool with it, then that's fine.
Yeah. Well, I'm cool with it, and I'm putting it on a video and posting it to YouTube. So
Hey, thank you.
there you go. There you go. Calvin, I see you on here. I'm saying it so you don't have to. So I'll take the liability for you too if you're
You know what? I really appreciate that. I really do.
I figured you would.
But I will tell you, Jay, I
Okay.
always said the same thing.
You come bring me lunch when we're in court, okay?
Right.
All right.
I will tell you, I agree with what you've said.
Yeah.
Crossing out that, and what Nolani is presented there is to cross out that line 17, 18, and 19. But have that rapport with that other broker, with the competing broker that and have that knowledge out in front of everybody.
Yeah.
Because they're going to be in the same position someday.
For those of you that haven't met Calvin Gregoria, he's our managing broker in the Kent office and was nice enough to jump on and just join us. I think a lot of us managing brokers are listening in and participating in each other's trainings and courses. The more times that we hear it and the more times that we hear different ideas and thoughts and perspectives, the more equipped we will be to help y'all. And so anyway, it's been an interesting couple weeks.
Just to quickly answer, what Daryl brought in there, yes, that is what we've always been told. Don't cross out these things. And the reason being is it could affect some other document or condition and is somewhere else in the purchase and sale. But this is directly only affecting that 22A. And so it's like, hey, cross it out.
Yeah. Now, thanks, Calvin. Feel free to jump in and ask any questions or any comments or anything that you have thought is interesting that your agents have been bringing to you that you want to add to today's time is welcome for sure. One thing that I did write down when I was listening to Annie's example after my example is this, especially with the 22A and AD stuff, but also with other things in here. One of the ways that I have gotten it in my head straight in a fairly short period of time has been to explain it to you all, to explain it and talk about it and debate it with the managers, to hear other people talk about it in different ways. And so I highly suggest that you do the same. It would not harm you to grab, to pair off or grab somebody in the business and say, hey, can I just role play this with you for a minute? Can we just talk through this for a minute? Let me explain to you what I think it is. Let you explain to me what how you would say it, and have, take opportunities there when those opportunities present themselves. The managers, the sales managers and I also would be happy to do that with you and listen to you explain it back to us if that's of value to you. So, and Calvin Gregoria is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for that kind of thing. So I'll put his phone number on the screen. And we just appreciate Calvin. We really do.
Oh, golly. I laugh at that, but all of the classes I took from Annie and from Justin, they all said that. Now, if you ever have any questions, contact your designated broker or branch manager. I went, oh, no.
Yeah, yeah. You guys can't even answer the questions on the forms
I
that you
couldn't-
wrote, and you want them to call us? Anyway,
Exactly.
you know, in all seriousness, we're happy to take your calls. Don't
Yeah.
call Calvin. You're calling me or your sales managers, of course. Okay, what else? Other questions, thoughts, queries, comments? Any concerns that you have? Maybe you feel like, hey, I know this, I understand this, but I'm concerned about this. Can we talk about this?
I have a question. This is Angelica. I don't have my camera on.
That's okay.
So with the new 35R, when we're responding and we're asking for additional inspections, we are not including that part, or we're allowed to include just this part of the inspection that says additional inspections required or whatever, right?
Yes, yes, that's correct. You actually have to, in order to utilize that additional inspection time, you have to provide something from an inspector that says that you need additional time to, or, you know, additional inspections in this, you know, for this thing. But oftentimes on that same page, there will be other information.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so that it's that other information that you've got to be super, super careful about, because, right, you can't send something that says, hey, I need, you know, additional foundation inspector, but then it also says the roof is shot, that this is that, and, you know, whatever, right? So you may need to do one of two things. You may need to spend some time blacking out, right, the stuff that is not pertinent to what you are asking for. Or you need to go to the inspector and ask for a new sheet to be created that just says the recommendation is to have, you know, a specified provider come out and take a look at things. Okay, so either way, you definitely can't do that, or you have to send something, but you can't send too much. What you got, Calvin?
Okay, I think I'm still on everything.
Yep.
Continuing with that 22 AD, okay, and let's go from the first part, which was, you know, the number one, but let's jump into number two. Can you help me understand number two, which is the appraisal to the addendum form 22AA? And so if you didn't choose one, you could choose number two, which if you're a strong buyer and you've got a strong offer and you know your financing is already there, you could bypass 17, 18, and 19 by adding a 22 AA. Am I correct on that? I'm trying to get that in clear in my own mind. So
could you bypass a 22AD by utilizing a 22AA is your question.
Well, that and checking box number 2 on the 22AD and giving money, but utilizing a 22AA involved.
Okay. And a 22AA is an appraisal addendum. So what Calvin is saying is, hey, what if we used the second section, waived our financing contingency completely, right? And just said, hey, we'll use the first one, we'll waive it quick or waive it right away or whatever, but we'll use a 22AA as the appraisal to let us have the appraisal portion. I don't believe that would help, Calvin, if you were also using a 22AD, right? Because the 22AD is there for a low appraisal. So even if you, before, like, you know, last week, if you wanted to not have an inspection, or I'm sorry, a financing contingency, you could do without the financing contingency. You could use a 22AA if you wanted to have the appraisal contingency, and you could use a 22AD, and those forms would not conflict or have issue. But if you wanted to try that same kind of a tactic now, that 22AD still would supersede or control the 22AA, I believe, because ultimately, remember, the 22AD now says if you have waived your financing, then it's irrelevant. So it's a good question, but I don't think it's a workaround. What do you think?
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah, but I've had several of my brokers ask that same question, so I thought I'd throw it out to everyone here.
It's a good question. It's a good
Yeah.
question. I was listening to something. Okay, so we've hit on that. I'm gonna answer. I'm gonna bring up an example of something to talk about and debate and to get your guys' perspective. Well, maybe it's not even a lot of perspective, but again, it's one of those things where every time that there's changes, there are loopholes and there are goofy things that can come up. And I was listening to Andy Fitzsimmons, one of her videos about dangerous practices that people are utilizing. And one of the things that she was really, really down on was the idea that a seller would let 5, 10, 15 people come through their house and do a pre-inspection on the home. Okay. She thought that there was a lot of liability in that. Also, though, she doesn't like providing a pre-inspection from the seller to the buyer either, which if you saw my invites for the sales meetings next week, we're going to be talking about that topic. We're going to be debating and chatting about that. But at any rate, one thing in listening to her talk about that and then think about, and remember, those were recorded before the new forms were launched, and then thinking about the new forms and the new kind of pitfalls and things that we can find ourselves in trouble. And it dawned on me this. Right now, with the new forms and the 35 and the inspection form and the 35R, there's the provision that says if you ask, if you send anything to do with the inspection, but you don't have an express written consent of the seller to send that information, that you have waived your inspection contingency, right? So now anything that your buyer asks for, out the door. And really, ultimately, you're probably going to pay for it out of your own darn pocket. That's how that is going to play out, I promise. Okay? So you can't send anything. Cool. So now we have, I don't really think it's cool, but now we've protected the seller. Now the seller is protected. But as a listing agent and as a seller, if you allow pre-inspections, what's to prevent the buyer in their initial offer to you of sending the new form, the 35, hold on, I'll get you the number. It's a 35C or a 35W. Give me 30 seconds here. The 35W, remember the new 35W on here is the waiver of the inspection contingency, and there's a section where they can ask for things. What's to prevent a buyer from doing a pre-inspection that was approved and accepted and okayed by the seller, making their offer, asking for items, and including the inspection report in the initial offer? There is nothing protecting the seller. There's nothing saying, if you've waived your inspection contingency in your offer, there is nothing saying that there is a penalty. There's no specific penalty given there. Now, on the pre-inspection addendum that the seller would hopefully require, but doesn't always provide, we still have people doing pre-inspections without ever signing a pre-inspection form, right? If they've provided the pre-inspection form and the buyer has signed off on it, it says on that form, hey, buyer, you can't send me anything. Okay? So now a seller might feel protected or a listing agent might feel protected. But guess what it hasn't done? They didn't adjust that 35P pre-inspection. There is no identified penalty. And you don't even have a mutually accepted contract yet. So how could you apply the penalty that they've now put on the 35 and the 35R to a pre-inspection in a contract that's not mutually accepted? How could you say, oh, well, now the buyer has to buy it at the list price because they provided me I don't have to do anything that you gave me. You don't even have a mutually accepted contract. So they protected the seller, kind of. But it doesn't look to me that anybody took the time to think about how it works with those pre-inspections and information that could come from a buyer to a seller. The whole idea was to de-weaponize the inspections, right? And the information that comes from an inspection, and attacking sellers and making sellers have to disclose things that they didn't otherwise know before. But ultimately, they left a gaping hole here, as far as I see it. Are you guys following that? Does that make sense? Don't ask me what you should do, because the answer is I don't know, right? And we're going to talk about that more at Tuesday's meetings. But the reality is that it's not, your seller still has some liability or some potential concern there if they are allowing pre-inspections, because there really is no consequence to a buyer sending a seller a portion or all of an inspection report when we're talking about doing it before mutual acceptance. Anyway, something interesting. What else? Other thoughts, comments, questions? Anything you want to vent about? Anything you want to procedural? Anything at all? All right.
So just to follow up on that, with the pre-inspection,
yeah,
you can technically send it. If you do it ahead of time, you can send it with your offer saying you want these things fixed without waiving your inspection because you didn't include an inspection addendum.
There's no mutual acceptance, so there's nothing to enforce because you don't have a legally binding contract. So there's nothing negative that can come to you. I mean, what's the consequence? What's gonna how? There really, there's nothing. There's no enforcement there. There's no teeth behind anything that happens before you have mutual acceptance. Other questions, thoughts, comments? What's that?
Roger that.
Roger that. All right. All right, everybody. I appreciate you all jumping on. We've got about 20 people here this morning, and I hope that this was helpful, useful. I think that we did cover a couple of the things that are the more confusing things, and maybe shed some light on some new topics that you maybe hadn't thought of or heard of or debated before. My goal is to be available to answer questions about forms whenever you need it, however you need it, and I know you're going to have them, which is why it's so important to have as many of these opportunities to learn as possible. So I appreciate you all taking the time to jump on and spend a little bit more time learning your forms and knowing your craft. I really, really appreciate it. So thanks, everybody. I'll stop the recording. I'll stick on until everybody jumps off in case there's any other sidebar questions. Yeah, thank you very much, everybody. Talk soon.
Right on.